Ghost of Tsushima is the latest effort from infamous developers Sucker Punch Productions, and only their second full release to grace the PlayStation 4 since 2014's infamous Second Son. That's a whole lot of years to spend crafting the ultimate samurai experience, and while Ghost of Tsushima isn't without its faults, it's another superb first-party offering for Sony's current-gen console. Set in 13th century Japan in the midst of the Mongol invasions, Tsushima puts players in the shoes of Jin Sakai, who, when faced with insurmountable odds, is forced to abandon his honorable ways and become the Ghost, a ninja-like spectre who utilizes every dirty trick in the book to force the Mongols off his homeland. It's a wonderfully realized journey, a case where the gameplay illuminates the narrative just as much as the cutscenes do, and it's likely still that players will find themselves just as torn up about the decisions they make in combat as Jin is. He's a samurai, he should be better, but what do you do when you're faced with an enemy that doesn't respect you? Do you stand your ground and be principled at great cost, or do you make a sacrifice and fight on their level? It's a compelling question that Tsushima levels from start to end, and one that makes the game as much a tragedy as it is a war epic, equal parts Throne of Blood than just purely Yojimbo. There comes a point in every open world video game where the map opens up and invites you to explore its every nook and cranny. When such a moment occurs at the end of Ghost of Tsushima's intro, it made the hair stand on the back of my neck. Sucker Punch's latest game is stunningly realized and steeped in the traditions of classic samurai movie fare, to the point where players can actually choose to play the entire story in a black and white subtitled Kurosawa mode. Its visual cues go beyond just the cinematic too. Tsushima Island looks like an oil painting come to life, and Sucker Punch knows how good it looks, given they've mapped the game's photo mode button to the D-pad for quick access. There are occasions where Tsushima can look a little rough around the edges. Not every character model is as intricately detailed as the lead cast, for instance, but it is perhaps the most vibrant open world I've ever encountered. Fields of tall grass sway gracefully in the wind, blossom twists and turns as it falls from the trees, and the sea crashes against the island's rocky cliffs without relent. It's one of the most unique looking open world titles to have released over the previous 7 years. That cinematic approach manifests across gameplay and cutscene, and while the transition between either could be smoother, be prepared for a lot of fade to black transitions and static camera angles, the game makes you want to savor every moment. Possibly the most surprising thing about Ghost of Tsushima though is how deep the combat goes. It's very much of the post-Souls era and has a lot in common with the combat system Respawn opted to go with in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, but only deeper. Just as you feel as though you've gotten to grips with Jin's arsenal and skill set or the range of enemies on offer, Sucker Punch always manages to find another wrinkle to add to combat. There were times where playing the game I worried that combat would start to feel repetitive, but just as that was about to happen, out came a new enemy, combat stance or mechanic to consider. It keeps the player on their toes, and it must be said that the combat itself is fantastic and boasts a very good learning curve. Sucker Punch took instruction from sword expert David Ishimaru to lend another layer of authenticity to the game's swordplay mechanics, and it truly shows. Animations are fluid, bloody, and well-paced, with players utilizing a variety of stances, attacks, dodges, and parries to gain the upper hand over the bandits and Mongols terrorizing the island. Each stance has its own skill tree, and each is effective against a specific enemy type. When all are coming at you at once and you manage to switch between all 4 stances in one fluid motion, effortlessly dispatching your foes with different strikes, Tsushima is at its frenetic best. It's also up to the player as to how they approach combat too. Do they embrace the way of the Ghost and utilize stealth, deception, explosives, and poison? That last one is particularly gruesome. Or do they approach the enemy head-on and initiate a standoff? Both have their bonuses and drawbacks, but executing the latter flawlessly is ridiculously satisfying, and illustrates yet another way that Sucker Punch have crafted no ordinary open world title. Before Ghost of Tsushima, Sucker Punch had carved out a niche with infamous and embracing morality systems and multiple choice mechanics in their titles, forcing the player to make sometimes difficult decisions that would lead them on the path to becoming a hero or villain. Tsushima does away with such a morality system and fully embraces Jin's transition from a samurai samurai who serves the shogun to the ghost who serves the people. Some may bemoan the lack of player freedom in this instance, but it only enhances the tragedy of the story, and the crushing sense of inevitability that, no matter how much you try to honor Jin's clan, you're only a stealth kill away from continuing his moral descent. Sporadically throughout gameplay, if you choose to kill someone dishonorably, you'll be treated to flashbacks of Jin training with his uncle Shimura as a young child. It emphasizes that the choices you're making aren't made without pain or consequence, and when the time comes for Jin to finally embrace the way of the ghost, you'll be surprised at how affecting it truly is. I can't talk too much about the story, and especially not given everything after Act 2 is strictly prohibited, but it is superb and engages with the feudal setting brilliantly. Jin is a lord, a samurai, rescued by a peasant thief at the beginning of the game called Yuna, who encourages him to realize the futility of his honor-bound code, and who also coins the ghost legend to rally the island and spread fear amongst the Mongol ranks. There's a fascinating conflict and dynamic that arises as a result of Jin's transformation into the ghost and his partnership with Yuna, but I can't really say anything more than that without getting too deep into spoilers. Now, this is both a positive and a negative, but Tsushima Island is filled to bursting point with content, most of it good, but sometimes forgettable. Tsushima Island is a large, expansive setting, but it's also deceptively large. Side missions or tales are hidden around every corner, and it's frequently the case that, on the way to explore a specific objective, you'll encounter all sorts of bonuses, locations, and missions almost by accident. Sometimes this is great, but it can occasionally prove frustrating when you set your mind on a given objective. Of course, in sheer value for money terms, the amount of stuff to do in Ghost of Tsushima is bound to come as a positive to many players. Sucker Punch have estimated that the whole game may take up to 50 hours to complete, and yeah, given the amount of hours I've sunk into it since getting my hands on it the other week, I can definitely see how that estimate would be accurate. The game always encourages you to explore every path, and a lot of the side tales truly enhance the main story and your experience overall. But ultimately, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the game is something to be savored, not rushed. And while the constant stumbling into shrines, enemy encampments, jewels, and other such activities and locales can sometimes prove disorienting, it was rare that one of these tales didn't pique my interest. There's a clear sense of reward with each encounter, and while there will undoubtedly be a creeping sense of familiarity with a lot of the open world tasks found across the game, Tsushima's innovations are still plentiful. Of course, Tsushima has the style to match the substance, so much so that I've spent untold hours customizing my version of Jin to adopt all sorts of different outfits during my time in the game. The customization in Tsushima is simple but layered. Various template outfits can be found and upgraded and come with their own unique benefits. Equip the Traveler's outfit, for instance, and while you'll be lacking in armor, you'll more than make up for that in the ability to clear more fog off the map and be alerted to nearby collectibles, whereas more armored outfits provide more defense at the expense of stealth. Collecting flowers will give access to different dyes to change the color of Jin's garb, and composing haikus, a standout feature, I really can't reiterate that enough, provides new headbands to wear too. Add to that various hats, helmets, masks, bandanas, katana sets, and bows, and you have all the materials you need to craft your own perfect samurai. Of course, it would also be remiss to omit the various presentation and photo mode options when discussing customization too. Players can elect to play the game with English or Japanese dialogue, or even play entirely in black and white with English subtitles. I started off with the English voice acting, but switched to Japanese soon after, and then never went back. Still, it is disappointing that animations are only lip-synced to the English voice actors, and an argument could be made that Sucker Punch should have maybe committed to making the Japanese version the default right from the off. I would be lying if I said there weren't times while playing Tsushima that I was worried the game would devolve into a typical open-world title. There are camps to liberate, lighthouses to climb, and collectibles to find, but it's the way the game goes about doing those things that prevents any kind of malaise from settling in. Honestly, playing Tsushima felt like opening the windows and letting in a cool, refreshing breeze. The industry has seen some tremendous as well as forgettable open-world titles over the current console generation, but few play like Tsushima does. The emphasis on environmental storytelling has paid off tremendously, if not for the fact it divests from clunky UI and icon mania, then because it indulges in my love of flowers and birdwatching. It's just a wonderfully composed experience, and one that again should be relished. Exploring shrines, temples, and even just the various vistas dotted across the open world is just as satisfying as using your big ol' katana to slice your enemies in two. Granted, exploration can be just a bit finicky at times, as scaling up and down cliffs doesn't feel nearly as fluid as it should be. Reaching your destination is always worth it, even with the jank to consider. But I do want to take the time now to highlight one of my favorite things about Ghost of Tsushima, the mythic tales. As Jin travels the island, he'll encounter a musician called Yamato. Yamato also moves around the map, telling tales of ancient warrior techniques, weapons, and armor for Jin to try and find and recover. All are engaging, and the introductory cutscenes are suitably stylish, modeled on Sumi-e paintings rather than being modeled using in-engine footage. So yeah, whereas some of the other side tales in the game can feel a little so-and-so compared to the main quest, the mythic tales are almost certainly just as good. However, even though Tsushima having a lot of things to do is undoubtedly great in terms of getting more bang for your buck, the density of content can prove off-putting after a while. When Tsushima's environmental cues work, they really work. There's nothing quite like following a fox to honor a nearby shrine and then to pet said fox, which is very enjoyable, I must say, or following a bird to a nearby onsen or bamboo post to strengthen your sword arm. It's just that sometimes with the sheer amount of content on offer, it can prove difficult to get a peaceful thought. You'll be following your best mate, the fox, to a nearby shrine, only to rescue a peasant and then trigger another side mission, all the while your other friend, the bird, will be nagging you to go somewhere else. There have been plenty of occasions while playing the game where I've set out to do a side mission I've been neglecting, only to encounter another one on the way there and then get distracted, and this is a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again until you're just like, so much content. Bear in mind as well that this is without actually doing that much exploration off your own back, so that sense of achievement sort of gets lost in translation. Which brings me to by far the most frustrating thing about Tsushima. For all that it's one of the most cinematic games I've ever encountered, that mantra can be lost in translation, in and out of gameplay way too often. Generic fade to black cutscenes where Jin and an NPC talk while the camera switches between three fixed positions are common, and are really at odds with Tsushima's filmic sensibilities. This is made doubly frustrating by the fact that actual cutscenes are extremely well presented, but they don't form the bulk of your interactions with the many characters you'll encounter while playing the game. In their place comes those annoying static fade to black cutscenes that are just not that great. Likewise, while other studios have long since mastered the art of seamlessly making the transition from cutscene to gameplay, or by including unique animations so as to keep the player immersed in the experience, Sucker Punch always seems to spring for a quick fade to black instead. It feels more than a little bit dated, and when everything else about the game is presented so immaculately, it really does stick out like a sore thumb. All that said, however, Tsushima marks a strong return for Sucker Punch and a fine way for Sony to close the book on the PlayStation 4. There might be clear areas to improve, but there's no taking away from just how strong it performs when it comes to gameplay, presentation, and narrative. So that's why I'm going to give it 4 stars out of 5.